My name is Zuri. At 18, I was the overweight and acne-prone disappointment of a prestigious medical family. When I refused to go to medical school, my mother packed my bags and threw me out into the freezing rain, telling me I was dead to her. 10 years later, I walked into my golden child sister's $500,000 wedding at a private Malibu resort. My mother dropped her champagne glass, calling me a defect. My sister screamed for security to toss me out. But when the wealthy groom rushed over, his face pale with panic, he did not grab me. Instead, he turned on my family and yelled, "How dare you speak to her that way? You have absolutely no idea who this woman is." Before I tell you how I brought my arrogant family to their knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe success is the best revenge. The Pacific Ocean sparkled behind the towering glass walls of the Malibu resort, but the real show was inside the grand ballroom. The space was a breathtaking display of excessive wealth, decorated with thousands of white orchids and draped in sheer silk. The room was packed with the upper echelon of the medical community. There were top-tier surgeons, hospital board members, and department heads, all dressed in designer gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos. For my family, reputation and status within the Black elite meant everything. They were the kind of people who only measured a person's worth by the letters following their last name and the size of their medical practice. At the center of it all was my mother, Valerie. She was holding court near a towering ice sculpture, wearing a silver silk dress that screamed old money. She was laughing brightly with the chief of surgery from her hospital, projecting the perfect image of a successful, wealthy matriarch. She looked exactly as I remembered her, impeccably groomed, terrifyingly poised, and completely consumed by how others perceived her. I smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my custom-designed navy blue jumpsuit. It was a subtle outfit, but anyone with true wealth would recognize the craftsmanship and the staggering price tag. I took a deep breath and stepped into the grand ballroom. I did not sneak in through the back. I walked right through the center aisle, letting the heels of my shoes click rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I kept my head high, my shoulders back, and my expression entirely unreadable. I was no longer the frightened, insecure teenager they had discarded. It took exactly 45 seconds for my mother to notice me. She had been mid-sentence, a polite smile plastered on her face, when her eyes locked onto mine across the room. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her manicured fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sharp crash silenced the conversations immediately around her. Several wealthy guests turned their heads, trying to see what had caused the unflappable Dr. Valerie Harrison to lose her composure. I did not stop walking until I was standing just a few feet away from her. The air between us grew instantly cold. "What the hell are you doing here?" Valerie hissed. Her voice was kept low to avoid a massive public scene, but the absolute venom in her tone was unmistakable. She marched toward me, her expensive heels crunching over the broken glass, paying no attention to the mess she had just made. You uneducated disgrace to this family. Get out before I call security." She glared at me, her eyes scanning my outfit as if looking for dirt or rags. She clearly expected me to look like a beggar to fit the narrative she had created in her head. I stood perfectly still, meeting her furious gaze with a calm, relaxed smile. "Hello, Mother. It is wonderful to see you too." The ocean breeze coming through the open terrace doors felt refreshing against my skin, contrasting sharply with the burning hatred radiating from the woman standing in front of me. "Do not call me Mother," she spat, taking another step closer. Her eyes darted around nervously, checking to see which of her elite colleagues were watching our interaction. 10 years ago, when I threw you out on the street because you dared to drop out of your pre-med program, you died to this house. You dragged our name through the mud. We are a lineage of top-tier physicians. We save lives and build legacies. And you chose to throw it all away to be a lazy, worthless dropout. How dare you bring your broke, pathetic face to this resort? I looked at the woman who had birthed me and felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no intimidation, no desire for her approval. I remembered the freezing night she tossed my cheap duffel bag onto the driveway. I remembered her telling me that a black woman only gets respect in this world if she has an MD after her name. She had screamed that my dreams of starting a business were nothing but delusional fantasies from a fat, ugly girl who could not handle real academic rigor. She had left me with $20 and a warning to never return to her pristine neighborhood. She had expected me to fail. She had wanted me to fail so she could prove her point. But standing there looking at her panicked face, I knew I had already won. You have some nerve showing up here today. Valerie continued, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. We told everyone you died in a car accident. Do you understand me? We had to invent a tragic death to cover up the monumental shame of having a college dropout for a daughter. People wept for you. I had to accept condolences from the hospital board because the alternative was telling them my own flesh and blood was too stupid to pass an entrance exam. Now get your cheap clothes out of my sight before you ruin Chloe's perfect day. I listened to her toxic words, letting them wash over me without leaving a single mark. It was almost sad how small her world truly was. She was so blinded by her obsession with medical degrees and country club gossip that she could not even recognize the power standing right in front of her. She thought I was there to beg. She thought I was there to ruin a party. She had no idea I was there to dismantle her entire empire. I reached out and gracefully picked up a fresh glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter who was staring at us with wide eyes. I took a slow, deliberate sip, maintaining unbroken eye contact with my mother. I came to attend a wedding. I replied smoothly, keeping my voice light and conversational. Doesn't the upper class always preach about grace and forgiveness? I thought it was time for a little family reunion. The sharp sound of heavy footsteps stomping against the marble floor broke whatever suffocating silence had fallen over my mother and her elite circle. The crowd of hospital directors and society socialites parted like the Red Sea. Through the gap came the bride herself. My older sister Chloe marched toward me, her face contorted into a mask of pure rage that completely ruined her carefully contoured makeup. She was practically vibrating with fury, moving so fast that the massive layers of white tulle and silk around her waist whipped violently through the air. You are not invited! Chloe shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of the refined, elegant tone she had been faking all evening for her new in-laws. She closed the distance between us and thrust her hand forward, pointing a massive diamond engagement ring directly an inch from my nose. Get out of my wedding. You have no right to be here. You are nothing but the same fat acne-covered failure who dragged our family name through the dirt 10 years ago. You are the shadow I left behind in high school, and you will not ruin the most important day of my life. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked at the trembling finger pointed at my face and then slowly raised my gaze to meet her furious eyes. Chloe was breathing heavily, her chest heaving against the tight bodice of her dress. She was so consumed by the image of the scared 18-year-old girl I used to be that she completely failed to process the woman standing in front of her right now. I know exactly why you slithered your way in here. Chloe continued, her voice rising in pitch, making the nearby guests shift uncomfortably. You heard I was marrying into the Thorne family. You saw the news about Julian and his family's generational wealth, and you thought you could crawl back from whatever gutter you have been living in to beg for a handout. Well, it is not going to happen. My husband's white family is not a charity for broke, uneducated high school graduates. You will not get a single cent from my new husband. The sheer projection in her words was almost poetic. She was so desperate to protect her proximity to the Thorne family fortune that she instantly assumed everyone else was a gold digger too. She wanted to humiliate me, to reduce me to the pathetic scapegoat role I had been forced to play my entire childhood. She expected me to cry to lower my head, and to run away in shame, just like our mother had trained me to do. Instead, I let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh. I took a deliberate step forward, invading her personal space. I slowly looked her up and down, letting my eyes trace the intricate lace patterns on her bodice, the gathering of the tulle at her waist, and the specific cut of the neckline. I took my time making the silent stretch, making her squirm under my completely unapologetic scrutiny. You look very tense for a bride, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and low enough that only she and the immediate circle of gossiping aunties could hear. Though I suppose I would be tense too if I had to squeeze myself into a dress that clearly was not tailored for my measurements. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her chest. How dare you? This is a custom designer gown. Is it really? I tilted my head, feigning innocent curiosity, because from where I am standing it looks exactly like the Vera Wang spring collection from 3 seasons ago. and judging by the slight yellowing on the French lace near the hem, and the amateur stitching on the side seams where it was desperately taken in, I am willing to bet you bought it off a luxury consignment website. Probably highly discounted because the previous owner tore the inner lining. Chloe froze. The color instantly drained from her perfectly bronzed cheeks, leaving her looking like a ghost. Her hand dropped from her chest. I leaned in just a fraction closer, delivering the strike with surgical precision. Tell me something, Dr. Chloe Harrison. For a woman who constantly brags about her thriving dermatology clinic and her elite status, why are you wearing a second-hand dress to marry into a billionaire family? It seems to me that peddling Botox and chemical peels to desperate housewives is not paying the bills quite like you claim. Are you putting on this entire expensive circus just to convince Julian that you are his financial equal? The silence that followed was deafening. The surrounding guests who had been pretending not to listen suddenly exchanged wide-eyed glances. In the world of the black medical elite, appearances were absolute currency. Being exposed for wearing a second-hand gown at a $500,000 wedding was a social death sentence. I could see the whispers starting, the calculating looks from the hospital board members who had previously worshipped the ground Chloe walked on. "Shut up!" Chloe hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic, desperate whisper. Her eyes darted wildly towards the entrance of the ballroom, checking to see if Julian or his wealthy white relatives were within earshot. "You shut your lying mouth right now. You know absolutely nothing about my finances or my practice." But I did know. I knew exactly how deep the rot in her perfect life truly went. I just was not ready to reveal the full autopsy report yet. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to feel the exact same public humiliation she and my mother had forced me to swallow every single day of my youth. I stepped back, giving her room to breathe but keeping my posture completely dominant. "I do not need to lie, Chloe. The frayed seams on your waistline speak for themselves. You always were so obsessed with making sure everyone thought you were superior to me. You spent your entire life calling me a defect. But look at you now, sweating through a discounted dress, terrified that your rich new husband will figure out you are faking your entire lifestyle." Chloe raised her hand, her fingers curling into claws, looking for a split second like she was actually going to strike me across the face. Her chest heaved and she bared her teeth, all pretenses of the graceful, blushing bride completely discarded. "You are a monster," she breathed heavily. "I will not let you destroy this. I will not let you ruin my life. Guards, security." She turned around frantically, waving her arms toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall. "We need security in here immediately. Get this woman out of my sight. Throw her out onto the street where she belongs." The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung open before the echo of her screech even faded. But it was not just the resort security team that marched through. Leading the pack was a towering figure whose mere presence commanded the room into absolute submission. My father, Marcus Harrison. He moved with the terrifying, quiet authority of a man who sat on hospital boards and ruined careers with a single phone call. The crowd of elite physicians and socialites parted for him, instantly holding their breath. I was the patriarch, the architect of the Harrison family image, and he looked ready to commit murder. He stepped right between me and Chloe, his broad shoulders completely blocking my view of the trembling bride. He leaned in so close I could smell the sharp mint of his expensive aftershave. He did not yell. He did not need to. His voice was a lethal whisper designed to slice right through me without alerting the wealthy guests standing 10 feet away. "You will not do this," he ordered, his eyes narrowing into cold, dark slits. "You are not going to embarrass me in front of the Thorne family." I stared back at the man who was supposed to protect me when I was a struggling teenager. "Embarrass you?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "By simply breathing the same air as your elite guests." He stepped even closer, forcing me to tilt my head up to maintain eye contact. "We told the Thornes you died in a tragic car accident 10 years ago. We had to. How else were we supposed to explain a high school dropout from a family of top-tier physicians? We buried your memory so your sister could have a flawless future. Do not think for 1 second I will let you resurrect yourself just to ruin her perfect day." The sheer audacity of his words was staggering. They had not just disowned me, they had literally killed me off. They had accepted fake condolences from their country club friends and hospital colleagues just to avoid the monumental shame of having a daughter who refused to go to medical school. It was sick. It was twisted. And it was exactly the kind of brand protection I expected from Marcus Harrison. Faking a death to secure a wealthy white son-in-law. I smiled, letting my amusement show. That sounds like a terrible liability for a hospital financial director. What happens when the groom finds out his perfect bride is a liar? He is never going to find out. Marcus signaled to the two massive security guards flanking him. They stepped forward, their faces like stone. "Get this trespasser out of my sight," he instructed the guards. "Drag her through the service elevator. If she makes a single sound, throw her in the back of a police cruiser and press full charges for breaking and entering. I want her gone before Julian or his parents notice this circus." The guards lunged forward. Large, rough hands clamped down hard on both of my arms. Their grips were like iron vices meant to intimidate and leave bruises. They expected me to panic. They expected me to thrash and kick and scream like a hysterical party crasher, allowing them to justify tossing me onto the pavement. I did not struggle. I did not make a single sound. I simply stood my ground and locked eyes with my father, watching the smug satisfaction spread across his face. He actually thought he had won. He genuinely believed he had successfully swept his biggest mistake back under the rug with a snap of his fingers. He adjusted his silk tie, ready to turn back to his guests and play the role of the proud father of the bride. The guards yanked me backward, forcing me to take 2 steps toward the exit. Then a voice cut through the tense, suffocated air of the ballroom. It was a deep, commanding voice that carried absolute authority and pure, undeniable fury. "Take your hands off her immediately." The security guards froze instantly, loosening their grip on my arms. My father spun around, his smug expression vanishing. Behind him, Chloe gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth. Striding through the parted crowd was Julian Thorne, the brilliant biomedical researcher, the heir to the Thorne family fortune, and my sister's groom. His face was entirely drained of color. He pushed past the hospital directors and wealthy socialites, not even caring who he bumped into. His eyes were wide with a mixture of absolute panic and furious rage, but he was not looking at my father or his bride. He was looking straight at me. The silence in the ballroom became absolute. You could hear the faint clinking of ice melting in crystal glasses 3 tables away. Julian closed the distance between the grand entrance and our tense circle in a matter of seconds. His usually calm and composed demeanor was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic energy that had every guest holding their breath. He did not look like a groom ready to celebrate his union. He looked like a man who had just watched someone drop a match into a powder keg. Chloe reacted instantly. Her survival instincts as the family golden child kicked into high gear. She lunged forward, her heavy silk gown rustling loudly as she threw herself into Julian's path. She reached out and wrapped both of her hands tightly around his tailored sleeve, putting on her best damsel in distress performance. Her voice shifted octave, becoming high and sweet and dripping with manufactured panic. "Julian, darling, thank goodness you are here," Chloe whined, batting her long eyelash extensions and pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. "This crazy imposter snuck in while you were in the back room. She is completely unhinged. She came barging in here screaming and trying to ruin our beautiful reception. But do not worry, my father already has security handling it. They are taking this lunatic out to the trash where she belongs." Julian did not offer her a reassuring smile. He did not pull her close and kiss her forehead like a protective groom. Instead, he looked down at her hands, gripping his arm with an expression of visceral revulsion. It was the kind of look you give a stranger who just spilled something vile on your expensive suit. He ripped his arm out of her grasp with so much force that Chloe actually stumbled backward, her heavy dress nearly pulling her down to the marble floor. "Who are you calling crazy?" Julian demanded, his voice booming across the silent room. "How dare you speak to her that way? How dare you order security to lay a single finger on this woman?" Chloe gasped, pressing the hand to her chest. She looked around wildly, noticing the hundreds of elite guests staring at her humiliation. Her perfect fairy tale wedding was rapidly deteriorating into a public spectacle, and her wealthy white husband was taking the side of the woman she had just called a fat broke failure. "Julian, you are confused." Chloe stammered, her voice trembling as the mask began to slip. "You do not know her. She is a fraud. She is a liar and a nobody who just wants your money. Please let the guards take her away." Julian took a step toward her, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen from him in any of our previous boardroom meetings. "A nobody." He repeated the word as if it tasted like ash in his mouth. "You arrogant, foolish woman. You have absolutely no idea what you are doing. This woman is..." Before Julian could finish exposing my identity, my father stepped right into the middle of the crossfire. Marcus Harrison was a man who lived and breathed for optics. He could sense the catastrophic damage happening to his pristine reputation, and he was desperate to regain control of the narrative before the Thorne family realized they were marrying into a circus. He placed a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder, adopting his signature deep, soothing tone. The tone he used to pacify angry hospital board members and wealthy donors. "Julian, son, please calm down," Marcus said, flashing a tight, artificial smile. "Let us not cause a scene in front of your lovely parents." My father gestured vaguely toward the older white couple standing near the ice sculpture, watching the drama unfold in stunned silence. "Chloe is just upset because she wants everything to be perfect for you. This woman standing here, she is not an imposter. But she is also not someone you need to concern yourself with." Julian glared at my father, shaking his hand off his shoulder, just as violently as he had shaken off Chloe. "If she is not an imposter, then who is she, Marcus? Because from where I am standing, your security team is assaulting a guest." My father swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He lowered his voice, leaning in close to Julian, hoping to keep the shameful secret contained. "She is just a stray," Marcus whispered, his tone dripping with condescension and deep-seated disgust. "She is a prodigal daughter who lost her way a very long time ago. She was a delinquent who brought nothing but shame to our medical lineage. We cast her out for the good of the family, and we never speak of her. She is a ghost, Julian. Just let the guards remove the trash, and we can go back to celebrating your brilliant future." The realization hit Julian like a physical blow. I could see the gears turning in his highly analytical mind, the sudden widening of his eyes, the slight parting of his lips. He looked at my father, then at Chloe, and finally back at me. His gaze traced my features, registering the familial resemblance that he had previously missed. "Daughter." Julian whispered the word, barely audible. He looked at Chloe, who was actively avoiding his gaze and biting her lip in sheer panic. "She is your sister. You told me your sister died in a car crash 10 years ago. You sat in my living room and cried about how much you missed her." Chloe stepped forward, her hands raised defensively. "Julian, I can explain. It was too painful to talk about the truth. She is toxic. She is a high school dropout who refused to make anything of herself. We had to cut ties to protect our peace. I only lied to protect you from her jealousy." I watched the entire exchange with a calm, serene smile. I did not need to defend myself. I did not need to yell or scream or prove my worth. The beauty of absolute power is that it does not require you to raise your voice. I simply let the silence stretch, allowing Chloe and Marcus to dig their own graves with every desperate lying word they spoke. Julian was shaking his head slowly, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The brilliant biomedical researcher was putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and the picture it formed was horrifying. He was realizing that the elite, respectable black medical family he was marrying into was actually a den of ruthless, image-obsessed liars who had fabricated a death just to hide a relative they deemed unworthy. But what Julian knew, and what my family was completely oblivious to, was the identity of the woman they were calling a worthless delinquent. Marcus turned back to the security guard, snapping his fingers impatiently. "You heard me. The misunderstanding is over. Remove this woman from the premises immediately before I have you both fired." The guards stepped forward again, their hands reaching out to grab my arms. I took a slow, graceful step forward, slipping out of their reach before they could touch my jacket. I locked my eyes onto my father, radiating a cold, absolute authority that made him freeze in his tracks. "Let him speak, Dad." My voice was quiet, but it echoed through the tension-filled ballroom. The guests who had been whispering suddenly went dead silent. I shifted my gaze to the trembling groom, offering him a polite professional nod. I believe Julian was in the middle of a sentence before you so rudely interrupted him. Go ahead, Julian. Tell my father exactly who his ghost of a daughter really is. Tell my brilliant sister who she just ordered security to throw out onto the street. Chloe let out a harsh, mocking laugh, a desperate attempt to reclaim her superiority. Tell us what? That you somehow manipulated your way into meeting him before today. Julian, do not let her play mind games with you. She is a broke nobody. She does not even have a college degree. Julian looked at his bride with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. He took a deep breath, straightening his posture and adjusting his suit jacket. When he spoke, his voice rang out loud and clear, echoing off the vaulted ceilings, ensuring that every single doctor, socialite, and family member in the room heard his next words. This woman is Zuri Sterling. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Sterling Capital. Julian let those words hang in the air for a fraction of a second, allowing the sheer weight of the name to settle over the crowd. I could see the immediate spark of recognition flashing in the eyes of the hospital board members standing nearby. Sterling Capital was not just a wealth management firm. In the medical technology sector, it was the ultimate kingmaker. Julian turned his body slightly, angling himself away from Chloe and completely toward me in a gesture of profound respect. She is the anonymous angel investor who saved my entire career. Julian continued, his voice thick with a mixture of awe and residual anger. Last month, when the National Medical Board threatened to shut down my clinical trials for pediatric oncology, it was Zuri Sterling who personally wired $50 million to keep the research alive. She practically owns the laboratory where I work. My entire team, our entire mission to cure cancer only exists right now because this woman believed in my vision. The collective gasp from the elite crowd sounded like all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the ballroom. I watched my mother Valerie take a physical step backward. Her expensive silver heels wobbled unsteadily on the marble floor. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and aged. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out. The psychological blow she had just taken was almost visible. For my mother, a woman whose entire identity was built around the superiority of medical degrees, the realization was apocalyptic. The daughter she had thrown into the freezing rain for refusing to become a doctor was now the billionaire who held the strings to the doctors. I was the capital that funded the science she worshipped. Next to her, my father. Marcus looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His broad chest deflated and his authoritative posture crumbled into a pathetic slump. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, realizing that the security guards he had just ordered to assault me were standing mere inches away from one of the most powerful financial figures in the country. But Chloe simply could not process it. Her reality was too fragile, too heavily dependent on her status as the golden child to accept the truth standing right in front of her. No, Chloe shouted, her voice shrill and desperate, breaking the stunned silence of the room. That is a lie, Julian. You are being scammed. She is a high school dropout. 10 years ago, she could not even pass her medical college admission test. She locked herself in her room crying because she was too stupid to understand basic biology. Chloe pointed a shaking finger at me, her chest heaving with frantic breaths. Look at her. She is a fraud. Mom threw her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and $20. How could a fat, ugly failure who got kicked out of her own house possibly have $50 million to give you? She must have stolen it. She must be sleeping with some disgusting old billionaire who lets her play with his checkbook. Julian, you have to call the police right now before she drains your accounts too. The profound ignorance in her statement made me smile. I did not need to defend my wealth, but Julian was absolutely furious on my behalf. Are you actually out of your mind, Chloe? Julian demanded, his voice echoing with absolute disgust. Do you have any idea how corporate finance works? A $50 million capital injection requires months of rigorous due diligence. It requires clearance from the Securities and Exchange Commission, a fleet of corporate attorneys, and forensic accountants. Zuri Sterling did not hand me a personal check. She executed a highly structured corporate buyout that saved thousands of lives. And you have the audacity to stand there in a wedding dress paid for by my family and accuse a self-made billionaire of being a thief. Chloe flinched, physically recoiling from the harsh truth of his words. She looked around the room, desperately searching for allies. She looked at her fellow doctors, her sorority sisters, her country club friends, but no one met her gaze. The elite crowd was too busy staring at me with a newfound calculating reverence. In their world, money talked louder than anything else, and I was currently the loudest voice in the room. I decided it was time to step into the conversation. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my mother, who was still trembling beside my father. "You look surprised, Mother," I said, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. "I am not sure why. You always told me that the only way to earn respect in the Black community was to become a top-tier physician. You said business was a dirty game for people who lacked the discipline to save lives. You told me I would end up begging on the street." Valerie swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly. "Zuri," she whispered, her voice barely functioning. "I did not know. We had no idea you were." "You had no idea I was successful," I finished for her, maintaining my calm, unyielding smile. "Because if you knew I was wealthy, you would have never faked my death. You would have proudly paraded me around your little hospital galas, taking credit for my ambition. You would have told everyone how your tough love built my empire. But you did not know, so you chose to erase me to protect your fragile, arrogant ego." My father tried to salvage the situation, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Zuri, please. This is a shock to all of us. You have to understand, from our perspective, you disappeared. We were grieving. If you had just called us and told us you had started a firm." I let out a soft, cold laugh that stopped his pathetic excuses instantly. "I did not disappear, Marcus. You changed the locks on the house. Mother blocked my phone number. You instructed your country club friends to ignore my emails when I tried to ask for a small loan to start my business. You wanted me to fail so you could prove that defying the great Harrison medical legacy was a fatal mistake." I turned my attention back to my sister, who was hyperventilating, clutching her cheap second-hand Vera Wang dress as if it were armor. "And you, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You spent your entire life stepping on my neck to make yourself look taller. You mocked my weight, my skin, my dreams. You bragged about your perfect grades and your perfect skin while watching our mother emotionally destroy me. You thought getting a medical degree made you a god. But tell me something, dear sister. How does it feel to know that the brilliant white savior you are trying to marry into the very man you hope will elevate your social status essentially works for me?" Chloe let out a choked sob, her perfectly manicured hands flying to cover her face. Julian looked at her with an expression of pure revulsion, realizing that the woman he was about to marry was not the compassionate healer she pretended to be. She was a vicious, insecure bully who had actively participated in discarding her own flesh and blood. The entire hierarchy of my family had just been obliterated in a matter of minutes. The untouchable matriarch was speechless. The arrogant patriarch was terrified. And the golden child was weeping in front of hundreds of people, realizing her fairy tale had just collided with a reality check she could not afford. The reality of the situation was simply too massive for Chloe to absorb, her brain refusing to accept that her ultimate punching bag was now her financial superior, completely short-circuited. The weeping stopped abruptly, replaced by a harsh, frantic breathing that made the heavy silk of her wedding dress heave up and down. She wiped her face aggressively, smearing her expensive waterproof mascara across her cheeks, and stepped away from Julian. She began to pace, circling me like a trapped rabid animal. Her designer heels clicked erratically against the marble floor. She looked at the elite medical professionals whispering among themselves, and then looked back at me, her eyes wide and manic. "It is a lie!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as it echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "It is a complete lie, and you are all fools if you believe a single word coming out of her mouth." She pointed her diamond-clad finger at my chest, her hand shaking so violently her rings rattled together. "I know who she really is," Chloe yelled to the crowd, desperately trying to win back her audience. "She is a fraud. She is a high school dropout who failed basic chemistry. She locked herself in her room 10 years ago, crying because she was too stupid to memorize simple flashcards. She has no degree. She has no pedigree. There is absolutely no way a broke, lazy failure built a venture capital firm." Chloe spun around to face Julian, grabbing his arm with an iron grip. "Julian, listen to me. You are a brilliant scientist, But you are being conned. She is playing you. She does not have $50 million of her own money. Look at her. She is probably acting as a front for some illegal operation. Or worse, she is a high-end escort. Yes, that is it. She is a sugar baby who found some decrepit old billionaire with one foot in the grave, and she is draining his bank accounts while he sleeps. She stole that money, Julian. She is a thief and a parasite, and she is using your clean reputation to wash her dirty money. The vulgarity of her accusations made several older women in the crowd gasp and clutch their pearls. The elite black medical community thrived on discretion and dignity. And here was the pristine bride screaming about sugar daddies and money laundering in the middle of her own reception. Julian looked at Chloe with a mixture of profound shock and deep, inescapable disgust. He pried her fingers off his suit jacket as if she were carrying a disease. "Chloe, you are losing your mind," Julian said, his voice dangerously low. "Do you even hear the words coming out of your mouth?" I held up a hand, signaling to Julian that I did not need him to fight this battle for me. I turned my body, slowly tracking Chloe as she continued her frantic pacing. I maintained a posture of complete stillness, letting my absolute calm contrast with her unhinged desperation. "A sugar baby." I repeated the words, letting a soft, amused laugh escape my lips. "That is a highly imaginative theory, Chloe. But let us talk about the reality of corporate finance for a moment. Do you honestly believe a wealthy older man simply hands over his corporate checkbook to a mistress so she can execute a Series B funding round for a biomedical research lab?" I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, backing her up against the edge of a lavish floral arrangement. The $50 million transferred to Julian's laboratory was completely authorized by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The disbursement documents bear my signature. The anti-money laundering clearances, the board approvals, the federal tax filings, they all have my name on them. I built Sterling Capital from the ground up while sleeping on a mattress on the floor, eating instant noodles and working 3 jobs. I did not inherit my wealth, and I certainly did not sleep my way to the top. I lowered my voice, just a fraction, forcing the gossiping hospital directors and society wives to lean in closer to hear every single word. But since we are on the topic of using one's body to advance professionally, let us discuss your medical career, Chloe. The sudden shift in my tone made Chloe freeze. The manic energy drained out of her, instantly replaced by a stark, visceral terror. Her eyes darted wildly toward our mother, who suddenly stepped forward trying to intervene, but I did not give them the chance to stop me. "You love bragging about your prestigious dermatology clinic," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "You love looking down on everyone who does not have an elite medical degree. But tell me something, dear sister. How exactly does a student who failed her medical board exams twice suddenly secure a highly competitive dermatology residency at one of the top hospitals in the country?" Chloe swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly. "Shut up," she whispered, a desperate plea that I completely ignored. "Did you really think that secret would stay buried forever?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Did you think no one knew about the married chief of dermatology who mysteriously championed your application? Should we tell your brilliant new husband about the weekend trips to that boutique hotel downtown? Should we discuss the massive hush money payment our mother discreetly wired to his wife when she found out and threatened to expose you to the medical board?" The collective gasp that ripped through the ballroom was deafening. The hospital directors, who had been sipping champagne, suddenly went rigid. The older physicians exchanged horrified glances. In their world, a scandal involving academic fraud and affairs with married department heads was the ultimate taboo. It was career-ending. "You are a liar!" Chloe screamed, tears of absolute panic streaming down her face. She looked at Julian, who had taken 3 steps back away from her, his hands covering his mouth in disbelief. "Julian, she is making this up to destroy me. She is jealous. She has always been jealous of my beauty and my success." I did not need to provide paper evidence right then and there. The sheer panic radiating from Chloe's trembling body and the way our father Marcus instantly looked at the floor in shame was all the confirmation the wealthy crowd needed. The golden child of the Harrison family. The pristine, brilliant doctor they had all worshipped was nothing but a fraud who had compromised every single ethical boundary to get her white coat. Julian looked at his bride, breathing heavily, as if he had just run a marathon. He shook his head slowly, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. He was marrying a woman who had no moral compass, a woman who had bullied her own sister and cheated her way into the medical profession he held so sacred. Seeing her perfect daughter completely shattered and her family's pristine reputation burning to ashes in front of the entire medical elite, my mother Valerie finally snapped. She could no longer rely on her title or her social standing to intimidate me. The sophisticated mask was gone. She was backed into a corner, and she resorted to the only weapon she thought she still had left: money and control. Valerie pushed her way past my father and planted herself firmly between me and the weeping bride. Her chest was heaving, her face a mask of desperate, arrogant fury. "That is enough of your vile lies," Valerie roared, her voice echoing through the silent room. "I will not stand here and let a resentful, bitter dropout ruin my family. I do not care what kind of company you claim to own. I do not care if you have $50 million or 50 cents. You have no power here." She pointed a rigid, manicured finger toward the grand doors of the ballroom, her diamond bracelets clinking together. "This is my event," Valerie declared, her voice dripping with desperate authority. "I paid $500,000 for this private venue. I signed the rental contract for this entire Malibu resort. My name is on the lease for the weekend, and I have the absolute legal right to decide who stays and who gets thrown out onto the street. Security will remove you right now, and if you resist, I will have you arrested for trespassing on my private property." I sit back against the plush velvet cushions of my sofa, letting the warm California morning sun wash over me through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. I take a slow sip of my chamomile tea, letting the delicate, soothing flavor calm my senses for just a brief moment. It really is genuinely hilarious when you sit back and think about it. People who build their entire existence on a fragile foundation of lies and social illusions always scream the loudest when absolute reality finally knocks on their front door. My mother actually believed that waving her status around and throwing money at a problem gave her supreme, unshakable authority over the universe. She had ruled our family with an iron fist, using her medical degree and her bank accounts to crush anyone who dared to step out of line. But she was about to learn a very harsh, very expensive lesson about what real, undeniable power actually looks like. Let us go back to that grand ballroom. The space was dead silent after my mother made her furious declaration. She stood there breathing heavily, her diamond jewelry catching the light of the crystal chandeliers as she pointed a rigid, manicured finger toward the exit. She had just publicly announced to a room full of the black medical elite that she paid $500,000 to rent the venue, and she demanded my immediate removal. She expected me to cower in fear. She expected the crowd of wealthy surgeons and society wives to nod in agreement and watch me be dragged out in absolute disgrace. She thought her wealth made her untouchable. Instead, the heavy oak side doors near the catering kitchen pushed open. Mr. Caldwell, the general manager of the resort, stepped out of the shadows and walked into the ballroom. He was a distinguished older gentleman who usually handled high-profile celebrity events and billionaire retreats with flawless grace. But right now, he looked like a man walking toward his own execution. His face was glistening with a thick layer of cold sweat, and his hands were gripping a silver digital tablet so tightly his knuckles had turned completely white. My mother spotted him immediately, and her eyes lit up with arrogant triumph. "Caldwell," she barked, her voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. "Call the local police department right this second. I want this woman arrested for trespassing and harassment. I signed a strict privacy agreement when I booked this entire property for the weekend. I paid you an exorbitant amount of money to ensure my family would not be disturbed by common street trash. Do your job and get her out of my sight." She did not stop there. She turned to the whispering crowd of hospital directors, smoothing her silver silk dress, attempting to justify her cruelty to her peers. "You all know how hard Marcus and I have worked to build the Harrison family legacy," she announced, her tone shifting to play the victim. "We sacrificed everything to rise to the top of the medical community. We cannot let a bitter, uneducated girl who refused to put in the hard work destroy my eldest daughter's wedding day. She always wanted a handout. Even when she lived under my roof, she refused to study, preferring to waste her time on ridiculous business ideas. I will not let her ruin a $500,000 investment." I did not interrupt her monologue. I simply stood my ground, shifting my weight slightly, and locked my eyes directly onto Mr. Caldwell. The poor man was physically trembling. He looked from my furious mother to me and then down to the glowing screen of his tablet. He swallowed hard, the prominent lump in his throat bobbing visibly. Dr. Harrison, Mr. Caldwell began, his voice cracking slightly under the intense pressure of the room. I am terribly sorry, but I cannot comply with that request. I cannot call the police to remove this guest. My mother's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Her jaw dropped slightly before her expression hardened into pure outrage. What did you just say to me? She demanded, marching toward the manager with her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. Do you know who I am? I am the head of surgery at one of the most prestigious hospitals in this state. I am paying your salary this weekend. If you do not signal your security team to drag her out of this ballroom right now, I will personally see to it that you are fired. I will sue this resort for breach of contract and emotional distress. I will ruin this establishment and make sure you never work in hospitality again. The wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few of the more prominent doctors exchanged nervous, judgmental glances. They were accustomed to seeing Dr. Valerie Harrison as a composed, elegant, and fiercely professional woman. Seeing her scream at a resort manager like a frantic dictator was rapidly shattering the pristine illusion she had spent decades carefully cultivating. Behind her, Chloe was still weeping softly, clinging to the back of a chair, while my father Marcus stood frozen, completely unsure of how to navigate a situation that could not be solved by a simple hospital bribe. Julian, the brilliant groom, stood absolutely still, watching my mother's meltdown with cold, analytical eyes. He was seeing the true face of the family he had almost married into. He did not say a single word, allowing my mother to dig her own social grave deeper with every threat she hurled at the terrified manager. I decided it was time to put Mr. Caldwell out of his misery. I walked forward, closing the distance between myself and my mother. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, undeniable authority of a woman who owned the very ground she was standing on. Mr. Caldwell, I said, keeping my tone perfectly even and professional. Please do not let Dr. Harrison intimidate you. You have a job to do. Read the latest update on your tablet. Tell my mother exactly why you cannot remove me from this property. Tell her why her loud threats of a lawsuit are completely meaningless. My mother whipped her head around to glare at me, her face twisted in disgust. Shut your mouth, she hissed, stepping toward me. You have no authority to speak to the staff. Caldwell, I am giving you one last warning before I call my legal team. Ma'am, please listen to me, Mr. Caldwell pleaded, taking a defensive step backward as my mother advanced on him. I truly cannot remove her. My hands are completely tied. The corporate office just contacted me 5 minutes ago with an urgent override regarding your reservation and the legal status of this entire property. On override, my mother scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest defensively. What override? I paid the deposit 6 months ago. I swiped my platinum card this morning for the remaining balance. I rented this entire compound for my daughter. There is no override that supersedes a signed contract. You are making pathetic excuses because you are incompetent. Mr. Caldwell looked at his tablet again, his hand shaking so much he almost dropped the device. He took a deep, shaky breath, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. He looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and absolute dread. It was the exact kind of look a seasoned doctor gives a patient right before delivering a terminal diagnosis. He knew that the words he was about to speak would detonate a massive bomb in the middle of this high society wedding and change the power dynamic of the room forever. I smiled softly, gesturing toward the manager with an open hand. Go ahead, Mr. Caldwell, I prompted gently. Read the corporate notification out loud, so all of these esteemed guests can hear it clearly. My mother loves an audience. Let us not disappoint her today. My mother turned an ugly shade of purple with rage. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the tablet out of the manager's hands. Give me that device, she demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. I will call your corporate office myself. I will have the chief executive officer of this hospitality group on the phone in 2 seconds, and you will be packing your desk into a cardboard box tonight. Mr. Caldwell stepped quickly out of her reach, holding the tablet tightly against his chest to protect it. Dr. Harrison, please. He begged, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet, tension-filled room. You do not understand what is happening here. You cannot call the CEO to complain. And why the hell not? My mother screamed, all pretense of high-class dignity entirely abandoned in front of the medical elite she so desperately wanted to impress. I kept my eyes locked firmly on my mother's furious, panicked face. The moment of impact was rapidly approaching. I could literally feel the electricity in the air, the absolute and total shift in the power dynamics of my family. She had spent my entire youth making me feel small, insignificant, and powerless. She had used money as a weapon to control her children and crush anyone who defied her perfect medical legacy. Now that very same weapon was about to be turned against her in the most spectacular way possible. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the crisp ocean air flowing into the ballroom, simply waiting for the manager to deliver the final fatal blow to her fragile paper-thin empire. Mr. Caldwell did not cower this time. He lowered his digital tablet and stood perfectly straight. He did not look at my mother. Instead, he turned his entire body toward me. In front of the entire assembly of elite surgeons, wealthy socialites, and furious family members, the general manager bowed. He bent forward at a perfect 90-degree angle, a gesture of absolute total submission to his new employer. My mother stumbled back as if she had been physically struck. The collective gasp from the room was loud enough to drown out the crashing waves outside on the Malibu beach. Dr. Harrison, Mr. Caldwell said, his voice suddenly steady and carrying a newfound absolute authority. I cannot call security on Ms. Sterling because she is not a trespasser. You, however, are currently a guest who has failed to settle her bill. Your platinum credit card was declined 3 consecutive times at 7 o'clock this morning when our accounting department attempted to run the final authorization for this weekend's events. My mother let out a sharp, hysterical laugh that sounded like tearing metal. That is a lie. That is a ridiculous, pathetic lie. My card has no limit. It is a temporary bank hold because of the unusually large amount. Run it again right now. Call my private wealth manager immediately. Do you have any idea how much money flows through my accounts? We did call your bank, Dr. Harrison, Mr. Caldwell replied, his professional tone unwavering. They informed us that your accounts are severely overdrawn. There is no temporary hold. There are simply no funds available to cover the $500,000 balance you owe this establishment. Furthermore, Mr. Caldwell continued, raising his voice over my mother's frantic, desperate protests, this resort has been quietly navigating bankruptcy for the past 6 months. We were placed into corporate receivership. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, all assets, deeds, and operational control of this entire property were officially acquired in a hostile cash buyout. The new parent company is Sterling Capital. Mr. Caldwell gestured respectfully in my direction. Ms. Zuri Sterling is the sole legal owner of this entire estate. Every ballroom, every guest suite, every grain of sand on the private beach outside belongs to her. My staff and I now work exclusively for her. I cannot remove my boss from her own property, but she has every absolute right to ask you to leave. The reaction from this crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The elite Black medical community was a snake pit of gossip and ruthless judgment. I watched as women in designer gowns leaned in to whisper furiously to their husbands. The words declined and overdrawn rippled through the grand ballroom like wildfire. The pristine, flawless image of the Harrison family was disintegrating in real time. My mother was completely stripped of her heavy armor. She looked frantically around the room, making eye contact with the chief of surgery, the hospital board members, the wealthy donors she had spent decades kissing up to. They were all looking at her with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. In their world, running out of money was a sin, but being publicly exposed as a financial fraud was an irreversible death sentence. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure every single syllable dripped with lethal precision. $500,000 to rent a venue you could not afford. Mother, I said, shaking my head in mock sympathy. Did you really think you could keep up this pathetic charade forever? You have been walking around this party draped in expensive silver silk, acting like royalty, while your bank accounts have been bleeding dry for months. Your credit cards have been maxed out since last winter. You have been shuffling debt from one hidden account to another, just to keep the lights on in that massive, useless mansion of yours. Shut your mouth! My mother shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. She lunged forward, but my father, Marcus, grabbed her arm, pulling her back. He was sweating profusely, looking terrified that I was going to expose even more. But I was just getting started. Do not try to silence me now, I said, keeping my gaze locked on her terrified, widening eyes. You wanted an audience today. You invited all these important people to witness your grand triumph. Let them witness the actual truth. You and Dad are completely broke. You took out a second mortgage on the family home just to pay the initial deposit for this fake royal wedding. You leveraged everything you own, putting yourselves on the brink of absolute financial ruin just to throw this pathetic circus. I turned my attention to Julian, the brilliant groom, who was staring at my family with an expression of pure, unvarnished horror. He was a man of science, a man of facts, and the facts being presented to him right now were utterly repulsive. And why did you do it? I asked, gesturing toward Chloe, who was weeping uncontrollably into her hands. Because you needed a lifeline. You realized your precious golden child was never going to make enough money peddling skin creams to sustain your exorbitant lifestyle. You saw Julian Thorne. You saw his generational wealth, his pristine white family name, his brilliant future. You decided he was the perfect financial life raft for your drowning family. You threw this massive wedding to convince him and his parents that you were their equals. You tricked him into believing he was marrying into a stable, prestigious medical dynasty, when in reality, he was marrying into a mountain of debt and a family of desperate, manipulative social climbers. That is not true, Chloe sobbed, stepping toward Julian with her hands outstretched, her cheap second-hand wedding dress dragging heavily on the floor. Julian, please do not listen to her. My parents have money. They are just experiencing a temporary cash flow issue because of bad investments. We are not using you. I love you. You have to believe me. Julian took another massive step backward, treating Chloe like a venomous snake that had just tried to strike him. Do not touch me, Julian demanded, his voice shaking with a cold, terrifying fury. A temporary cash flow issue. Your mother's credit cards are bouncing at our own wedding reception. Your family secretly mortgaged their home to pay for a party to impress my parents. You lied to me about your sister dying. You lied to me about your finances. What else are you lying about, Chloe? Is anything about you actually real? Julian's parents. The wealthy older couple standing near the ice sculpture looked absolutely scandalized. Julian's mother was clutching her husband's arm, her face pale with shock. They were old money, quiet, and conservative, and they were currently trapped in the middle of a screaming match about bounced credit cards and secret mortgages. They were watching their son's new in-laws be exposed as complete financial frauds on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. Julian, please let us explain, my father, Marcus pleaded, using his best hospital administrator voice. His tailored suit suddenly looked baggy on his deflating frame. The economy has been difficult. We made some strategic financial decisions to ensure Chloe had the day she truly deserved. It was out of love. We meant no disrespect to you or your family. We are still top-tier physicians. Our earning potential is massive. We can recover from this minor setback. Earning potential, I echoed, laughing loudly, the sound cutting through his pathetic excuses. Do not make me laugh, Marcus. Your earning potential is exactly why I decided to buy this resort this morning. I knew your accounts were empty. I knew the final authorization would fail miserably. I bought this property knowing I would have the absolute pleasure of standing here while the general manager handed you the massive bill you could not pay. I wanted to watch you realize that the daughter you kicked out into the freezing rain, the one you said would never amount to anything, is now the only person standing between you and a pair of handcuffs for defrauding this resort. My mother sank to her knees right there on the polished marble floor. The great Dr. Valerie Hare, the woman who terrorized nurses, intimidated colleagues, and destroyed my teenage self-esteem, was kneeling in a puddle of spilled champagne and her own shattered pride. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her social execution fully set in. Every single person she had ever tried to impress was currently watching her publicly default on her bills. Her superficial friends would cut her off immediately. Her colleagues would laugh at her behind her back in the hospital corridors. She was entirely ruined. I looked down at her, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of closure. You told me I was a defect, I said, my voice soft but carrying a lethal edge. You told me I was useless because I did not want to wear a white coat and pretend to be a god walking among men. But look at you now. You are kneeling on a floor that I own, crying over a bill you cannot pay, begging for mercy from a crowd that is already turning their backs on you. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch before delivering the next blow. But the absolute best part of this entire evening, Mother, is that your financial ruin is not even the worst secret I brought with me today. You think bouncing a credit card is embarrassing. Just wait until Julian and your precious hospital board members find out how you really make your money. My mother remained on the floor, weeping into her hands, but my father Marcus did not kneel to comfort her. In the cutthroat world of hospital administration, a sobbing wife was a liability, but a billionaire daughter was a massive, unmined asset. I watched his survival instincts override whatever shred of dignity he had left. The transformation was entirely nauseating to witness. He straightened his tailored suit jacket, cleared his throat, and completely adjusted his posture. The terrifying patriarch who had just ordered security to drag me out by my hair suddenly vanished. In his place stood the charismatic hospital financial director, ready to negotiate a multi-million-dollar merger. He literally stepped around my mother, treating her like an obstacle on the floor, and walked toward me. He pasted on a wide, artificial smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. The sheer audacity of his pivot made a few of the wealthy guests gasp in disbelief. "Zuri, my brilliant girl," Marcus said, his deep voice projecting across the silent ballroom. I felt my stomach churn at the word brilliant. 10 years ago, he stood in our kitchen and told me my brain was a wasted organ because I could not pass organic chemistry. Now he was looking at me like I was a walking bank vault. He opened his arms slightly, as if expecting me to step into an embrace. I did not move a single muscle. My icy stare forced him to awkwardly drop his hands back to his sides. He coughed, attempting to maintain his polished facade for the audience. "We always knew you were destined for greatness," Marcus continued, weaving a masterful, completely fabricated narrative for the listening crowd. "Blood is blood, Zuri. We had to be harsh on you back then. We had to push you out of the nest so you could learn how to fly. It was tough love, but look at the incredible woman it forged. You are a self-made billionaire. Your mother and I are overwhelmingly proud of you." The gaslighting was so blatant, so perfectly executed, that for a fraction of a second, I almost had to admire his sociopathic dedication to the lie. He was actually trying to take credit for the success I built while sleeping on bus station benches and eating out of vending machines. I tilted my head, studying him like a biological specimen under a microscope. "Is that what you call it, Marcus? Tough love? Because I distinctly remember you telling the neighbors I was a thief, so they would not offer me their couch when you locked me out in the freezing rain." He waved his hand dismissively, acting as if my trauma was just a minor misunderstanding. "The past is the past," he insisted, his eyes gleaming with undisguised greed. "What matters is the present. What matters is that you are here today. You own this magnificent resort now. You have ascended to your rightful place in the financial elite. It is only fitting that the new owner hosts her own sister's wedding." I raised an eyebrow, letting him dig his grave deeper. "Go on." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, though it still carried in the dead silent room. "This is a family matter, Zuri. We can keep this quiet. You can cover these minor outstanding balances for the venue and the vendors. You can sponsor your sister's wedding today. Consider it a grand gesture to show the Thorne family that the Harrisons are united. Consider it a way to make up for the mistakes of your youth when you abandoned your family obligations. Pay off these debts and we will welcome you back with open arms. You can be a Harrison again." Behind him, Chloe actually stopped crying. She looked up from her ruined dress, her tear-streaked face suddenly illuminated with a desperate, pathetic hope. She genuinely believed this would work. She had spent her entire life watching our father manipulate and negotiate his way out of every problem. She thought my years of trauma could simply be erased with a signature on a luxury resort invoice. She thought I wanted their validation so badly that I would gladly pay $500,000 just to sit at their table. Julian the groom stared at my father with absolute unfiltered horror. The brilliant researcher was watching his future father-in-law pivot from calling his own daughter trash to begging her for money in the span of exactly 3 minutes. The complete lack of moral integrity was paralyzing him. I looked at my father, absorbing the full magnitude of his twisted narcissism. He was not asking for a favor. He was offering me a transaction. I was offering to sell me back the basic parental affection he had withheld for a decade, but only if I bailed them out of their self-inflicted financial ruin. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice or throw a tantrum. I simply let a low, chilling laugh escape my lips. The sound was entirely devoid of warmth, cutting through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. "Sponsor this wedding." I repeated the words slowly, letting them echo off the crystal chandeliers above us. "You want me to sponsor a party for a sister who just called me a fat, ugly failure 10 minutes ago. You want me to bail out a mother who faked my death to protect her country club status. You are offering to let me be a Harrison again, as if that name is a prize to be won, and not a toxic disease I spent 10 years curing myself of." I took a deliberate step forward, forcing Marcus to take a step back. The fake smile finally slid off his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. "You are offering me a place at your table," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "But Marcus, you do not seem to understand the reality of your situation. You do not have a table anymore. I bought the table. I bought the room the table sits in, and I am certainly not going to pay for a chair I already own." His jaw tightened, his eyes darting frantically toward Julian, who was now completely disgusted by the entire Harrison family. "Zuri, be reasonable." Marcus pleaded, his tone shifting from manipulative charm to rising panic. "We are on the brink of losing everything. The hospital board members are watching us right now. If you do not clear these accounts, our reputation will be completely destroyed. We will lose our home. We will lose our positions. You have $50 million to throw at a research lab. $500,000 is pocket change to you. Just pay the bill and we can all walk away from this with our dignity intact." I stared directly into his panicked, greedy eyes and delivered the final shattering blow to his desperate illusion. "Pay the bill," I asked, my tone turning completely to ice. "No, Mr. Director. I am not here to sponsor your pathetic social climbing circus. I am not here to pay your debts. I came here to collect them." Marcus froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the bright ballroom lights. "Collect?" he stammered, unable to process the word. "What are you talking about? Do you honestly think my presence here today is a coincidence?" I asked, gesturing toward Julian, who was watching me with intense realization. "Do you really believe I poured $50 million of my personal capital into Julian's biomedical research lab out of pure charitable kindness? You work in hospital finance, Marcus. You know exactly how aggressive venture capital firms operate. We do not write checks without knowing every single dirty secret of the people we are getting into bed with." The air in the ballroom grew impossibly heavy. The tension was absolute. My father swallowed hard, a visible bead of sweat rolling down his neck. Chloe clutched her dress, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I reached into my designer handbag. I bypassed the credit cards and the car keys. My fingers wrapped around a thick, heavy black folder. It was the exact folder my forensic accounting team had handed me 3 days ago. It contained the ultimate weapon, a weapon forged from their own breathtaking arrogance and greed. I pulled the black folder out and held it up for the entire room to see. The wealthy doctors and hospital executives strained their necks trying to get a better look at the document in my hand. I did not just audit Julian's laboratory. I announced, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. Because Julian was engaged to the golden child of the Harrison family, my firm conducted a full, comprehensive due diligence investigation into his future in-laws. We dug into the financial records of the hospital where you serve as financial director, and where Mother serves as head of surgery. We pulled the patient logs from Chloe's private dermatology practice. We tracked every single dollar, every prescription, and every hidden shell company. Marcus staggered backward, as if I had just shot him in the chest. "No." He gasped the words, slipping out involuntarily. "Yes," I whispered, smiling, as I watched his entire world prepare to burn. I know exactly how you afford your luxury cars. I know how you pay for your country club memberships. And I am about to show Julian and every single one of your elite colleagues the exact body count you left behind to build your precious medical dynasty. I lifted the heavy black folder from my designer handbag and let it drop onto the center of the nearest linen-covered catering table. The heavy thud it made echoed like a judge's gavel across the grand ballroom. Every single eye in the room locked onto that folder. The whispers died instantly. The wealthy hospital board members, the socialites, the elite surgeons, they all stood completely frozen waiting for the executioner to speak. Before I poured $50 million of my personal capital into Julian's laboratory, my audit team had to perform a standard corporate procedure called due diligence. I projected my voice, ensuring the people standing near the grand ice sculpture heard every single syllable. We investigate everything. We look for hidden liabilities, secret debts, and reputational risks. And since Julian was about to officially become a Harrison son-in-law, my forensic accountants decided to run a quiet, comprehensive background check on the prestigious hospital where my father serves as the chief financial officer and my mother rules as the head of surgery. Marcus lunged forward. His polished, charismatic veneer completely vanished, replaced by raw animal panic. He reached for the black folder, his hands shaking violently, trying to snatch the document away before the truth could infect the room. "Do not touch that," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "That is corporate property. If you lay a single finger on it, I will have you charged with tampering with evidence before the sun sets." Marcus froze, his hand hovering inches above the leather binding. He looked up at me, his chest heaving, his eyes begging for a mercy he had never once shown me. "Zuri, please. You do not understand the complexities of hospital administration. The funding models are complicated. We have to make creative financial decisions to keep the doors open to serve the community." Serve the community. I repeated the phrase, letting a harsh laugh escape my lips. "Is that what you call it, Marcus? Serving the community?" Because according to the federal tax filings and the hidden offshore accounts my team uncovered, you have been serving no one but yourself. I reached out and flipped open the heavy cover of the folder. I did not need to look at the pages. I had memorized the numbers. I knew exactly how deep their rot went, and I was ready to carve it out for everyone to see. "Let us talk about the Hope Foundation," I said, watching my mother Valerie physically recoil at the name as if she had been struck. "The charity fund established specifically to provide life-saving surgeries for underprivileged Black children in our city. You host a massive gala for it every single winter. You stand on stage in your designer gowns crying about how much you care about the youth. You beg wealthy donors to open their checkbooks." The wealthy donors in the room, many of whom had written those exact checks, suddenly went rigid. The atmosphere shifted from scandalous gossip to active, furious realization. These were prominent Black business owners, politicians, and philanthropists who had trusted my parents. They had donated their wealth believing they were uplifting their own community. Discovering that their generosity had been weaponized to fund my mother's luxury lifestyle was a betrayal that went beyond simple theft. My auditors tracked the capital flow from the Hope Foundation over the past 5 years. I continued stepping closer to my parents, forcing them to shrink back under the weight of their own crimes. Only 20% of those donations ever reached a pediatric patient. The other 80% was systematically funneled into a network of dummy corporations. Shell companies registered in Delaware that provide absolutely zero medical services, but charge the hospital exorbitant consulting fees. I tapped a long, manicured finger against the top document in the folder. And guess whose names are listed as the primary beneficiaries on those shell companies? Yours, Marcus, and yours, Valerie. My mother gripped the edge of a nearby chair to stop herself from collapsing entirely. "We built that hospital," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperate, unhinged entitlement. "We put our blood and sweat into that institution for 30 years. We were underpaid for our brilliance. We deserved a greater share of the equity. We took what we were owed for saving thousands of lives. You stole from dying children." Julian's voice cut through the room, dropping the temperature to absolute zero. The groom stepped forward, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The brilliant biomedical researcher who had dedicated his entire life to curing diseases was staring at his future in-laws, as if they were actual monsters. He looked at the black folder and then looked at my father. You embezzled pediatric charity funds to buy luxury cars and country club memberships. Julian said, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it made the crystal glasses vibrate on the tables. You sat at my dinner table and talked to me about medical ethics. You looked my parents in the eye and pretended to be champions of healthcare equity while you were actively robbing the most vulnerable patients in your own community. Marcus raised his hands in a pathetic defensive gesture. Julian, son, you have to look at the bigger picture. The system is flawed. We just leverage the inefficiencies to maintain the standard of living expected of top-tier physicians. It is practically an industry standard. It is a federal crime. I corrected him sharply, shutting down his ridiculous justification immediately. It is wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. You did not leverage inefficiencies, Marcus. You committed millions of dollars in financial crimes to buy my mother her silver silk dresses and to fund this pathetic illusion of supreme wealth. I turned my attention back to the folder, flipping to the second tab. The crowd of elite doctors was now completely silent, absolutely terrified that their own names might appear in my documents. I had them exactly where I wanted them. But the embezzlement is just the financial side of your little criminal enterprise, I said, letting my gaze drift slowly over to my sister Chloe. The blushing bride was leaning against a marble pillar, looking like she was about to vomit. She had been praying the scrutiny would stay on our parents, but she was horribly mistaken. We cannot forget about the golden child, I announced, my voice ringing clearly across the grand ballroom. The brilliant, successful dermatologist who supposedly represented the pinnacle of the Harrison family legacy. The daughter who was everything I was not. Chloe shook her head violently, her eyes wide with terror. No, Zuri, please, do not do this. I am getting married today. Please just leave me alone. You did not leave me alone when you tried to have security drag me out by my hair 10 minutes ago, I reminded her coldly. You did not leave me alone when you stood in this very room and accused me of being a high-end escort. You demanded the spotlight, Chloe. Now you are going to stand in it. Julian turned to look at his bride, his expression hardening into stone. What did she do? He demanded, looking directly at me. Tell me exactly who I am supposed to be marrying. Do not listen to her, Julian. Chloe sobbed, taking a frantic step toward him, her heavy dress dragging behind her. She hates me. She has always hated me because I became a doctor and she failed. She is just trying to poison you against me. I do not need to poison you, I said calmly, turning to the second section of the black folder. Your own patient logs do that perfectly well. I looked directly at Julian, ensuring he heard every single word of the clinical data my team had uncovered. My forensic accountants noticed a massive discrepancy in the cash flow of Chloe's private dermatology practice. She was bringing in significantly more revenue than a standard cosmetic skin clinic could possibly generate. So we dug deeper. We cross-referenced her medical license with the State Pharmacy Board registry. Chloe let out a loud, gut-wrenching wail and covered her ears with her hands, as if physically blocking out the sound of my voice would stop the truth from destroying her life. Your beautiful, brilliant bride is not making her fortune by administering Botox and chemical peels, I told Julian, keeping my tone entirely clinical and factual. She is running a highly lucrative pill mill. She has been systematically overprescribing highly addictive opioid painkillers to wealthy clients who have absolutely no medical need for them. She charges them thousands of dollars in cash for under-the-table consultations, and in return she writes them blank check prescriptions for narcotics. The reaction from the hospital board members in the room was explosive. A murmur of absolute disgust swept through the crowd. In the American medical community, contributing to the opioid crisis was not just illegal, it was a repulsive violation of the Hippocratic Oath. It was the exact kind of scandal that could bring down an entire hospital network if the board did not immediately distance themselves from the accused. That is impossible, Julian whispered, though his eyes told me he already knew it was true. The hospital oversight committee would have caught that volume of prescriptions. The state medical board automatically flags anomalies like that. She could not have hidden it. She did not hide it. I corrected him, pointing a steady finger at my mother, who was still trembling on the floor. Her mother hid it. Dr. Valerie Harrison, head of surgery, used her top-tier administrative access to manually override the prescription flags in the hospital network. She wiped the red flags from the digital database to protect her golden child's illegal side hustle. They worked together. Chloe sold the drugs to rich addicts, and Valerie used her immense institutional power to cover the tracks. I closed the black folder with a sharp final snap, sealing their fate completely. You do not have a family of top-tier physicians, Julian. I concluded, my voice echoing with devastating finality. You have a family of highly educated drug dealers and white-collar criminals, and they were going to use your pristine white family name and your billionaire status as a human shield to protect themselves when the authorities finally caught up with them. I did not lower my voice. I wanted every single syllable to bounce off the crystal chandeliers and embed itself into the minds of every wealthy guest in that ballroom. You are not wealthy. I stated, the words landing like heavy stones. You are broke, and you are thieves. You spent my entire childhood bragging about the Harrison family legacy. You threw lavish charity galas acting like the saviors of the Black community. But the reality is, you created a network of phantom shell companies. You used your position as Chief Financial Officer, Marcus, to approve the purchase of basic medical equipment at a 600% markup. And you, Valerie, used your authority as head of surgery to sign off on those exact purchases. I took a step toward my parents, pointing directly at the heavy black folder resting on the table. The money you stole did not come from some faceless corporation. It came directly from the Community Pediatric Fund. You siphoned millions of dollars meant for the treatment of underprivileged Black children. You took the money meant for their dialysis, their surgeries, their hospital beds, and you used it to buy imported sports cars. You used it to pay for your exclusive country club memberships. You used it to maintain this pathetic, empty illusion of upper-class superiority. The collective reaction from the ballroom was immediate and visceral. These were not just random guests. These were prominent politicians, successful business owners, and highly respected philanthropists who had written massive checks to my parents' charities. They had attended those galas. They had shaken my father's hand, believing they were contributing to a noble cause. A low, dangerous murmur swept through the crowd. It was the sound of absolute betrayal. A prominent local judge, who had been sitting near the front row, stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. His face was twisted in pure disgust. I wrote a $50,000 check to your pediatric wing last December. Marcus, the judge said, his voice booming with righteous anger. You sat in my living room and told me that money was going toward a new neonatal intensive care unit. Marcus opened his mouth, his hands trembling wildly, but no sound came out. The polished, charismatic hospital director was completely gone. In his place stood a cornered, desperate criminal. It did not go to a neonatal unit. I answered for him, keeping my gaze locked on my father. It went directly into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It paid for the very silk dress my mother is wearing right now. You are not the Black medical elite, Marcus. You are parasites sucking the lifeblood out of your own community just so you can pretend to be royalty. Valerie let out a strangled, dramatic gasp. She brought both hands to her chest, clutching the fabric of her expensive gown, as if she were suddenly struggling to breathe. She swayed on her feet, her eyes rolling back slightly. It was a classic Valerie Harrison maneuver. Whenever she was losing an argument, whenever she was backed into a corner she could not manipulate her way out of, she played the fragile victim. My heart, Valerie wheezed, leaning heavily against a marble pillar. Marcus, call an ambulance. The stress she is putting me under, it is causing a cardiac event. I cannot breathe. 10 years ago, that performance would have sent me into a panic. I would have backed down, apologized, and begged for her forgiveness. But today I simply stood there and watched her pathetic theatrical display with cold amusement. Do not bother calling the paramedics, I said, my voice slicing right through her fake medical emergency. My forensic accountants also audited your personal medical records, Valerie. Your heart is in perfect condition, but your bank accounts are flatlining and your freedom is about to expire. Save the acting for the federal judge. I am sure they will love the performance during your sentencing hearing. Valerie instantly stopped wheezing. Her eyes snapped open, glaring at me with a raw, unadulterated hatred that completely shattered her fragile victim routine. The guests around her actually recoiled, taking physical steps backward to distance themselves from her toxic presence. All around the ballroom, cell phones were appearing. The wealthy socialites who had previously kissed my mother's cheek were now hitting the record button. Camera flashes reflected off the crystal centerpieces. The social execution was being documented from 50 different angles. By tomorrow morning, this footage would be on every major news network. The Harrison family name was being permanently erased from polite society. "You planned this!" Marcus hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper as he realized the sheer scale of his destruction. He took a hesitant step backward, realizing the walls were closing in. "You came here today specifically to destroy us. You are a vindictive monster, Zuri. I am the monster." I laughed, the sound sharp and utterly devoid of humor. "You threw your own 18-year-old daughter out into a freezing winter storm because she refused to be a pawn in your narcissistic game. You told everyone I was dead, so you would not have to suffer the minor social embarrassment of having a daughter who wanted to start a business instead of holding a scalpel. You stole millions of dollars from dying children. And you have the absolute audacity to call me the monster." I closed the distance between us, forcing my father to look me directly in the eyes. I wanted him to see the powerful, unbreakable woman I had become. I wanted him to know that the very daughter he discarded was the architect of his total ruin. "I did not destroy you, Marcus," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Your own blinding arrogance destroyed you. I just provided the paperwork. You thought you could commit massive financial fraud and hide behind your prestigious medical titles forever. You thought your status made you invincible. But I built an empire that operates on facts and data, and the facts say that you are nothing but a common thief." Julian, the groom, had been standing frozen, taking in every single word. The brilliant biomedical researcher was a man of logic, and the irrefutable logic being presented to him was entirely devastating. He looked at my parents, the people who had welcomed him into their home, who had pretended to be his equals, with an expression of pure revulsion. "You used me," Julian said, his voice dangerously low. "You knew the hospital board was starting to ask questions about the missing funds. You knew the auditors were getting close. You rushed this wedding. You pressured me to marry your daughter so you could use my family's wealth and my pristine professional reputation as a shield." Marcus held up his hands, palms facing outward, in a pathetic attempt at surrender. "Julian's son, you have to listen to reason. The healthcare system is entirely broken. We were just trying to survive in a world that is rigged against us. We had to make compromises to maintain the standard of excellence expected of us. You stole from children to buy sports cars." Julian roared, his anger finally boiling over. "Do not you dare try to justify your greed by blaming a broken system. I dedicated my entire life to saving people. I work 80-hour weeks in a laboratory trying to cure cancer. And you sat at my dinner table sipping expensive wine paid for by the suffering of innocent patients." The disgust radiating from Julian was absolute. He looked at my father as if he were covered in filth. The wealthy white family Julian had brought with him, his parents and relatives who were standing near the front, were equally horrified. They were old money quiet and fiercely protective of their reputation. Being associated with a massive embezzlement scandal was their worst nightmare. Julian's father was already on his cell phone, speaking rapidly, in hushed, urgent tones to his own legal team. Valerie, seeing her entire carefully constructed world burning to ashes, let out a desperate, high-pitched sob. She fell to her knees, her expensive silver dress pooling around her on the marble floor. She reached out, grabbing the hem of my pants, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the fabric. "Zuri, please!" Valerie begged, her voice cracking with actual terror. The arrogant matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal facing decades in federal prison. "We are your parents. You cannot do this to us. They will take my medical license. They will put me in a cell. Please, Zuri, I gave birth to you. Show some mercy. We will give the money back. We will sell the cars. Just take the folder and walk away." I looked down at the woman who had tormented me for my entire childhood. I looked at the hands grasping at my clothes, the same hands that had slapped me across the face when I brought home a failing grade in chemistry. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation. I only felt the profound, satisfying weight of absolute justice. Mercy is for people who show remorse, Mother. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. You are not sorry that you stole. You are just terrified that you finally got caught. You do not regret leaving me on the street. You only regret that I survived long enough to become more powerful than you. I calmly stepped backward, forcing her to let go of my clothes. I smoothed my trousers, returning my attention to the heavy black folder on the table. The destruction of my parents was complete. Their reputation was annihilated, their wealth was frozen, and their freedom was rapidly expiring. But the Harrison family disease did not stop with them. There was still one more cancerous tumor left to extract. I slowly turned my gaze toward my older sister. Chloe was pressing herself against a marble pillar, desperately trying to blend into the background. She was hoping that my parents' downfall would be enough to satisfy my need for justice. She was praying I would leave her alone. But I had not come this far to do a partial cleanup. And now I announced, making sure the cameras recording the event captured my every word. Let us talk about the true pride and joy of the Harrison family. Let us talk about the brilliant, flawless doctor who was supposed to be everything I was not. I turned my back on our ruined parents and focused my gaze entirely on the bride. Chloe was practically melting against the marble column she was using to hold herself up. The heavy silk of her wedding dress looked absurd now. It was a costume of purity draped over a core of absolute rot. Now I projected my voice so the entire ballroom could hear every single syllable. Let us talk about the golden child of the Harrison family. The brilliant, flawless doctor who was supposed to be everything I was not. Chloe shook her head wildly. Her breath came in short, jagged gasps. Zuri, stop. Please. You have done enough. You ruined them. Just let me have today. Let you have today. I laughed, the sound cold and sharp. You demanded security, throw me onto the street. You stood there 5 minutes ago and told your wealthy new in-laws that I was a high-end escort. You do not get to call for a ceasefire just because you are out of ammunition. I stepped toward the center table where the black folder lay open. I flipped to the third section. The pages were filled with pharmacy logs, bank statements, and federal registry flags. When my firm began auditing your private dermatology practice, we found a glaring discrepancy, I stated, keeping my tone highly analytical. Your boutique clinic only sees about a dozen patients a week. You do standard chemical peels, laser treatments, and basic cosmetic procedures. Yet your reported revenue is astronomical. You are clearing profit margins that rival major surgical centers. It defied all standard medical business models. You cannot make $200,000 a month injecting lip fillers in a clinic that is empty 4 days a week. I looked directly at Julian. As a research scientist, he understood data better than anyone in the room. He was already leaning forward, his eyes locked on the folder. At first, my financial team thought it was simple money laundering. I continued pacing slowly around this table. But then we brought in healthcare auditors. We cross-referenced your patient list with the state prescription drug monitoring program. We tracked the out-of-state visitors who bypassed dozens of local clinics just to see a specific dermatologist in our city. And that is when we discovered the real source of your wealth. Chloe let out a high-pitched, desperate sound. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder off the table, but I simply slid it out of her reach and pushed it directly in front of Julian. Your beautiful, brilliant bride is not making her fortune by smoothing out wrinkles, I told Julian, my voice ringing with devastating clarity. She is running a highly lucrative underground pill mill. She has been systematically overprescribing highly addictive opioid painkillers to wealthy clients who have absolutely no medical need for them. The ballroom erupted into a chorus of horrified gasps. The opioid crisis was a devastating epidemic, and in the elite medical community, doctors who ran pill mills were considered the absolute lowest form of scum. They were nothing but drug dealers hiding behind the protection of a white coat. That is a lie, Chloe screamed. Her voice was shrill, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I treat pain. Cosmetic procedures can be incredibly painful. I am a licensed physician running a legitimate practice. You prescribe enough oxycodone and fentanyl patches to sedate a small city. Chloe, I shot back, shutting down her pathetic defense instantly. You charge these rich addicts thousands of dollars in cash for under-the-table consultations. You write them blank check prescriptions for heavy narcotics, and they pay you directly to a private offshore account. I turned to the crowd of elite hospital directors and socialites. They were listening in stunned silence, recording every word on their phones. But how does a simple dermatologist avoid the automated red flags from the state medical board? I asked, addressing the crowd. How does she prescribe that volume of lethal narcotics without triggering an immediate federal investigation by the Drug Enforcement Administration? I pointed a steady finger down at my mother, who was still slumped on the floor weeping in her ruined silver dress. She had a guardian angel working on the inside, I announced. Dr. Valerie Harrison used her top-tier administrative access at the hospital to manually override the prescription flags in the state network. She wiped the warnings from the digital database to protect her golden child's illegal side hustle. They operated a joint criminal enterprise. Chloe sold the drugs to wealthy addicts, and Valerie used her immense institutional power to cover their tracks. The absolute silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The elite crowd was paralyzed. Julian's parents, standing near the ice sculpture, looked as though they were going to be physically sick. The pristine black medical dynasty they thought their son was marrying into was actually an organized crime syndicate responsible for fueling addiction in their own community. Chloe fell apart completely. She threw herself at Julian, grabbing his tuxedo jacket with both hands. Her expensive makeup was totally ruined, with dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks, making her look unhinged. "Julian, please, you cannot believe her!" Chloe begged, her voice thick with hysterical tears. "She is framing me. She hacked into the hospital system and planted those records because she is jealous. She has always been jealous of my success, of my beauty, of you. She just wants to destroy my life because she is a miserable, lonely failure." Julian did not embrace her. He did not offer her a single reassuring word. Instead, he looked down at her hands, gripping his jacket with a look of pure, unadulterated revulsion. He reached out and forcefully peeled her fingers off his lapels, pushing her away with a solid shove. Without saying a word to her, Julian stepped forward and grabbed the black folder from the table. He did not need me to interpret the data for him. He knew exactly what he was looking at. The room watched in absolute silence as Julian flipped through the pages. His eyes scanned the pharmacy logs, the staggering quantities of narcotics prescribed to single individuals, the offshore bank transfers, and the digital access logs showing Valerie's login credentials, wiping the warnings from the system. His face drained of all color. The hands holding the folder began to shake uncontrollably. I was reading the indisputable clinical proof that the woman he loved, the woman he was supposed to spend the rest of his life with, was a monster who profited from human addiction and suffering. "These are your registration numbers," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. He did not look up from the page. "These are your exact login times. Chloe, you prescribed 80 milligrams of OxyContin a day to a patient who came in for a minor laser treatment. You refilled it 12 times over the course of 3 months. "Julian, I can explain." Chloe sobbed, reaching for him again, but stopping when he held up a warning hand. "They were in pain. The system is complicated. You do not understand the pressure my parents put on me to maintain our lifestyle." Chloe looked around desperately and then pointed a shaking finger directly at our mother on the floor. "She made me do it. Mom said we needed the cash flow to keep up with the hospital board members. She told me how to bypass the system. I just wanted to be a good doctor, but they forced me to maintain this image. They told me I had to bring in more money to save the house." Valerie gasped, horrified that her perfect golden child was betraying her to save herself. "You ungrateful little brat," Valerie shrieked, scrambling to her feet despite her earlier fake heart attack. "You loved the money. You loved the designer bags and the luxury vacations. Do not you dare put this all on me when you were the one writing the prescriptions." Julian snapped the folder shut. The sound was like a gunshot echoing in the massive room. The infighting between the mother and daughter disgusted him even more than the crimes themselves. "You are a drug dealer," Julian said the words, cutting through the air with lethal precision. "I spend 80 hours a week in a laboratory trying to develop targeted therapies to save people from dying of cancer, and you are using your medical license to turn vulnerable people into addicts for cash." Chloe dropped to her knees, the heavy silk of her gown pooling around her on the floor, mirroring our mother's pathetic stance just moments before. She grabbed Julian's leg, abandoning all remaining dignity in front of her high society guests. "I will stop. I will close the clinic." Chloe wailed, her voice echoing with desperate, ugly panic. We can move away. We can take your research money and move to Europe. I will give up my license. I will do whatever you want, Julian, just please do not leave me. I watched my sister groveling on the floor and felt a profound sense of closure. This was the woman who had spent my entire childhood mocking my weight, my skin, and my intelligence. This was the woman who told me I would end up a worthless burden on society. Now she was kneeling in her own filth, begging a man to save her from the consequences of her own horrific crimes. Move away with my research money, Julian repeated, his voice escalating into a furious shout. You mean the research money provided by the sister you just tried to have thrown out into the street? You actually thought you could use me as your getaway vehicle. You thought my family name would protect you from a federal indictment. He looked over at my parents. Marcus was staring blankly at the wall, completely defeated, his hands shaking at his sides. Valerie was crying silently, realizing that her arrogant intervention had destroyed both her and her golden child. You are all sick, Julian declared, his voice shaking with absolute disgust. Your entire family is a disease. I stepped forward, reclaiming the center of the room. The power dynamic was absolute. I was the architect of their ruin, and I had built it using nothing but the very truth they had tried so hard to bury. This is the reality of the Harrison medical dynasty, I announced, addressing the stunned crowd of hospital executives and elite socialites. They demand respect. They demand luxury. They look down on anyone who does not wear a white coat. But beneath that coat, they are thieves, frauds, and drug dealers. They are a danger to every single patient who walks through their doors. Chloe continued to sob on the floor, her hands covering her face as the weight of her permanent destruction settled over her. The elite guests who had been her friends and colleagues just an hour ago were now actively backing away from her, treating her like a contagious virus. The social isolation was immediate and brutal. You ruined my life, Chloe choked out, glaring up at me with raw, venomous hatred. You came here just to ruin my life. I did not ruin your life, Chloe, I replied, my voice completely steady and devoid of sympathy. I just turned on the lights. You are the one who chose to fill your house with garbage. Julian stood absolutely paralyzed for what felt like an eternity. His eyes, once filled with the warmth of a man deeply in love, now carried a hollow, profound emptiness. He looked down at the heavy black folder in his hands, reading the exact milligrams of lethal narcotics his bride had funneled into the streets. Then he slowly shifted his gaze down to Chloe. The woman weeping on the floor no longer looked like the brilliant, compassionate partner he thought he knew. She looked like a parasite. Julian raised the folder and slammed it directly into Chloe's chest. The heavy leather binding struck her and burst open, sending hundreds of pages of illicit pharmacy logs, offshore bank transfer receipts, and forged medical records raining down around her on the polished marble floor. Chloe flinched, letting out a pathetic whimper as the undeniable proof of her crimes scattered over her expensive silk wedding dress. I have spent my entire adult life locked inside a laboratory. Julian began, his voice vibrating with a cold, controlled fury that commanded the entire ballroom. I sacrifice sleep. I sacrifice my own health, and I dedicate every waking hour of my existence to finding a way to pull dying patients back from the brink of death. I research ways to save people. And you, he pointed a shaking finger at the scattered papers, you and your family kill people for money. You hand out lethal addictions to vulnerable patients just so you can buy a nicer car. Julian reached up to the lapel of his custom-tailored tuxedo. With a sharp, violent jerk, he ripped the white orchid boutonniere from his jacket, tearing the expensive fabric in the process. He threw the crushed flower onto the pile of criminal evidence surrounding Chloe. He planted his leather dress shoe directly on top of the white petals and crushed them into the marble. This wedding is cancelled, Julian declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Do not attempt to call me. Do not attempt to contact my parents. My legal team will be in touch to sever any remaining financial ties to your fraudulent family. The Harrison medical dynasty completely imploded. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, grasping desperately at the fabric of Julian's trousers. Julian, no. Please, you cannot leave me like this. I will fix it. I will give up my license. Just do not walk away. Julian kicked his leg free with a look of utter revulsion, backing away from her grasping hands. Marcus, my father, lost the last shred of his carefully crafted dignity. He lunged forward, attempting to grab Julian's shoulder. Julian, wait. We can contain this. The hospital board does not need to know. We can sign a non-disclosure agreement. Julian swatted Marcus's hand away as if batting away a disease. If you ever touch me again, Marcus, I will ensure my family's legal team buries you before the state authorities even get a chance. You disgust me. All of you disgust me. Julian turned his back on the weeping bride and the desperate patriarch. He walked toward his own parents, who were already gathering their belongings, their faces pale with shock and outrage at the criminal family they had almost merged with. They turned toward the exit, ready to leave the nightmare behind them. But the nightmare for the Harrison family was only just beginning. Before Julian could even reach the grand exit, the massive oak doors of the ballroom burst open from the outside. The force of the entry made the heavy wood crash violently against the walls. The wealthy guests gasped and scrambled backward, knocking over champagne flutes and crystal centerpieces in their haste to get out of the way. A flood of federal agents stormed into the pristine high society reception. They moved with swift tactical precision, fanning out across the room to secure the exits. The stark contrast of their dark navy windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI printed across the back completely shattered the elegant illusion of the Malibu resort. Right behind them walked several stern-looking officials wearing badges from the Federal Medical Board and the Drug Enforcement Administration. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing woman with a no-nonsense expression, marched straight down the center aisle. She bypassed the terrified hospital directors and the stunned socialites. She stopped directly in front of my trembling family. Valerie Harrison, Marcus Harrison, and Chloe Harrison. The lead agent announced, her voice echoing like a final judgment across the silent room. You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, grand larceny, and the illegal distribution of Schedule II narcotics. Place your hands behind your backs immediately. My mother Valerie let out a shrill, hysterical scream. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, her expensive silver gown tangling around her legs. No, you cannot do this. I am the head of surgery. I am a prominent member of this community. You are making a terrible mistake. I demand to call the hospital attorney. You can call whoever you want from holding Valerie, I said, my voice slicing cleanly through her frantic protests. I stepped forward calmly, walking past the federal agents. I did not raise my voice, but the absolute confidence in my tone commanded the attention of every single person in the room. I looked down at my mother, who was now backed against a catering table, shaking like a cornered animal. They are not making a mistake, I continued, keeping my gaze locked on her terrified eyes. I submitted that exact black folder directly to the regional director of the FBI and the state medical board 48 hours ago. I gave them the bank statements, the forged prescription logs, and the digital footprints of your administrative overrides. Chloe stopped crying and stared at me, her jaw hanging open in pure horror. You called the FBI 2 days ago. You knew they were coming. Of course I knew. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that sent a visible shiver down my sister's spine. I coordinated the timing with them. They were ready to arrest you yesterday morning, but I explicitly asked them to wait. I told them I wanted you to have the chance to put on your $50,000 wedding dress. I wanted Mother to put on her best diamonds. I wanted Marcus to gather every single elite doctor, hospital board member, and wealthy donor in his social circle into one room. I leaned down slightly, bringing my face closer to my mother's. I wanted the authorities to wait until you were dressed in your absolute best, surrounded by everyone you ever wanted to impress before they dragged you out in handcuffs. I wanted your downfall to be the most spectacular public event in the history of this city. You are a demon, Marcus whispered, staring at me with hollow, defeated eyes, as 2 federal agents grabbed his arms and forcefully turned him around. No, Marcus, I replied, standing tall and watching the agents pull his arms behind his back. I am just the consequence of your own actions. You spent your entire life stepping on the vulnerable to elevate yourself. Now you get to see how it feels to hit the ground. The sharp, mechanical click of cold steel handcuffs echoed loudly through the ballroom. It was a rhythmic, satisfying sound. Click. Marcus was secured, his face pushed against the marble pillar as they patted him down. Click. Valerie screamed obscenities, thrashing wildly, as a female agent locked the cuffs tightly around her wrists, completely ignoring her demands for special treatment. Click. Chloe sobbed uncontrollably, her hands bound behind her back over the delicate lace of her ruined bridal gown. The lead agent began reading them, their Miranda rights reciting the cold legal text over the sound of my mother's continuous wailing. The wealthy guests, the elite black medical community that my parents had worshipped their entire lives, watched in absolute silence. No one stepped forward to defend them. No one offered to call a lawyer. The people my parents had sacrificed my childhood to impress were actively recording their criminal arrests on their cell phones, treating them like a roadside spectacle. I stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos. The heavy, suffocating weight that I had carried in my chest for 10 long years completely evaporated. I watched the federal agents march the Harrison medical dynasty out of the grand ballroom. They were stripped of their titles, stripped of their wealth, and stripped of their false dignity. They were nothing but criminals being paraded out the front door. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles cut through the pristine Malibu dusk, casting harsh shadows across my parents' faces as they were shoved into the back of separate cruisers. Chloe tripped over the heavy silk of her discounted designer gown, scraping her knees against the concrete. She screamed my name, begging for a bailout, but her voice was muffled by the heavy slam of the police car door. I stood on the grand steps of the resort and watched the motorcade speed away down the Pacific Coast Highway. Behind me, the elite black medical community, the very people my parents had sacrificed my childhood to impress, were practically trampling each other to reach the valet. They were frantically deleting my father's phone number from their contacts and instructing their public relations teams to erase any photographic evidence tying them to the Harrison family charities. The social execution was absolute. I take a slow, deep breath, letting the crisp morning air fill my lungs. The chaotic memory of that ballroom fades, replaced by the quiet serenity of my Los Angeles penthouse. The golden California sunlight spills across the wide oak floors, bathing the room in a warm, brilliant glow. I trace the rim of my porcelain teacup, feeling grounded, feeling entirely safe. The oppressive, suffocating weight of the Harrison family expectations is completely gone. The federal trials that followed were exactly as brutal as I promised they would be. The evidence my forensic accountants handed over to the authorities left zero room for negotiation. Faced with decades behind bars, my family did exactly what narcissists do when cornered. They turned on each other like starving wolves. Marcus took the stand and testified that Valerie was the mastermind behind the shell companies. Valerie wept on the witness stand, claiming Marcus forced her to override the hospital systems. Chloe tried to throw both of them under the bus, claiming she was a victim of immense parental pressure and had no idea the opioid prescriptions were illegal. The federal judge was entirely unmoved by their pathetic theatrical displays. The United States Justice Department made an absolute example of them. Valerie and Chloe were stripped of their medical licenses permanently. Their names were blasted across national news networks as the faces of corporate greed and medical malpractice. All of their assets, the luxury cars, the offshore accounts, and the sprawling mansion I was once locked out of, were seized by the federal government to pay restitution to the pediatric charities they defrauded. Marcus received 15 years in federal prison. Valerie received 12. Chloe was sentenced to 10 years for her role in the illegal distribution of narcotics. The great Harrison medical dynasty was reduced to a miserable cautionary tale whispered about in hospital corridors. Julian Thorne emerged from the wreckage with his integrity completely intact. He cooperated fully with the federal investigators and publicly disavowed the Harrison family. Once the legal smoke cleared, Sterling Capital finalized the $50 million capital injection into his biomedical laboratory. Without the toxic interference of my parents, Julian was able to focus entirely on his pediatric oncology research. We developed a strictly professional, highly successful business partnership. Hai is a brilliant scientist and an honorable man. In a beautiful twist of fate, Julian eventually introduced me to his longtime colleague, a venture capital attorney, who possessed the exact kind of warmth and genuine kindness I had been searching for my entire life. That man is now my fiancé. We are planning a small, intimate wedding on the coast next spring. There will be no hospital board members to impress. There will be no forced networking. Just the people who actually love and support us unconditionally. I look out over the sweeping skyline of the city, feeling a profound sense of closure. For 18 years, my parents tried to convince me that I was fundamentally flawed. They called me the black sheep. They labeled me a defect because I refused to conform to their rigid elitist blueprint. They told me that without a white coat and a medical degree, I would be nothing but a worthless failure begging on the streets. But the absolute truth is that I was the only person in that entire bloodline who was clean enough to walk into the light. I was the only one who did not have to lie, cheat, or steal to build an empire. When toxic people try to convince you that you are worthless, it is rarely about your actual flaws. It is almost always about their deep, terrifying insecurity. They try to shrink you because they are mortified by how powerful you might become if you ever realize your true potential. They use insults and abandonment as weapons to keep you under their control. But you never have to accept the value that broken people assign to you. No one has the right to price your worth using their corrupted, toxic standards. If you find yourself surrounded by people who treat your ambition like a joke, who isolate you or try to make you feel small, do not waste your breath arguing with them. Do not scream. Do not beg for their validation. Walk away. Protect your peace. Use the pain of their rejection as fuel to build your own table. Work in absolute silence. Let them believe you are failing. Let them believe they broke you. Dedicate yourself entirely to your craft, your business, and your own healing. Because there is no argument more powerful than undeniable results. Build your empire while they are busy building their pathetic illusions. And when the time is right, let your massive, blinding success be the loudest slap they ever feel.